Hello and welcome to the Hash Rugby Chat podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favourite podcasting app so it can drop into your phone every week. Also, if you use that Apple thing, then please give us a 5-star review as well. So please do that. It apparently helps us reach more people. If you'd like to see what happens behind the covers, the show's live on YouTube at 8 p.m. New Zealand time every Tuesday, and you can also join the discussion on our questions via Twitter. Just follow at DrivingMaul and use #RugbyChat. I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. Joining me this week are my two regular team members, guests, whatever you want to call them. So first up, we have Ryan from the Sports Tribe app. How are you doing, sir?
Pretty good. Watched plenty of code over the weekend, so it's always a good thing.
And probably typed about a lot of rugby code over the weekend as well.
Yep.
And also down in Hamilton, we have Mike from the Real Mike Bullman. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, good, mate, good. Didn't watch a whole lot of rugby this weekend because the election and all that, but yeah, it's good to be back and looking forward to hopefully getting into some debate tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, yes, and so tonight we are going to do things a little bit different. Rather than having 5 hot topics, we are going to run through our All Blacks 15 of all time. And the guys have actually done some preparation this week, which is really nice, and given me their teams. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to run through our all-time 15, All Blacks 15. For those of you watching on YouTube, do let us know your thoughts, obviously, and clearly we'll be dipping into the old Twitter as well, and we've already got some comments on there, so we probably should kick off with the front row. So question 1, who makes your front row of your all-time All Blacks? And boys, you've gone a bit similar here. Both of you have decided that Tony Woodcock is going to anchor the scrum, and that old boy Sean Fitzpatrick will be a hooker. But so we have a bit of out on the loose side. We have a bit of a discrepancy there with Olo Brown and Owen Franks. But so why Woodcock, boys? What's so great about about him anchoring the scrum?
Well, I had to get some North Harbour guys into my team, so he seemed a pretty obvious choice. But I think really for Woodcock, he was a pretty much pencil him in every test at Loosehead. Rock solid at scrum time. Just a workhorse around the field. I mean, you try scoring, apart from the World Cup final, pretty rare. But I mean, your Loosehead prop, he's there for his scrummaging, and Tony Woodcock was up there with the best of them.
Oh, sorry, Loosehead. Yep, not side. Oh, I've gone toes and 2 tight heads, haven't I? By putting Cole Haim in there. I think there we go. So I'm off to an absolute cracker. I chose. Oops, never mind. So scratch my number 1. I've decided not to go with the Loosehead at all. Loosehead's only use one shoulder. It's all a bit of a waste of time. So I've gone and put as Gerard on YouTube has said, who put Heyman out on the wrong side? And yes, hands up, it was me. I put Heyman out on the wrong side, but I had to get Heyman in there because hey, he was the first $1 million player, so hence I had to put him out there. But yeah, I had no other option actually on the loosies than and I should have gone with Woodcock. I got myself all mixed up with my numbers there. But switching to the other side, Mike, you've gone with Owen Franks as your Lucy.
Yeah, I think that was probably a wee bit of a bias, I guess. Interviewed Owen a few times. He's a really cool guy, and to me, he's one of the stronger leaders yet quietly spoken guys in this All Black team. And you know, he always performs for me, and I don't think a big All Blacks game in recent memory that he hasn't really performed. And that was really the same with my viewpoint behind Tony Woodcock. You know, just stellar performances and a massive part of the All Blacks, at least for my generation.
And I'll be honest, I cheated with my with mine because I'm not a front row kind of guy. So I did a quick search on Google to say, okay, all time All Blacks 15s, and Olo Brown got mentioned quite a lot. So I just threw him in there. So why don't as Ryan, as you picked him as well, why don't you tell us about Olo Brown, because I haven't got a clue.
Yeah, well, I think he was part of a front row that really, through that mid-90s, was just every week the same three guys: Craig Dowd, John Fitzpatrick, Olo Brown. Again, a fantastic scrummager at tight head, perfect build for a tight head, just built like a real powerhouse. Another guy that you're never going to see show up in the open field, but just an absolute rock at tight head prop, and there's not much more you can ask for, I think, from a tight head. And
then I will finish off with hooker. I went for Mialama because, look at just purely because of the number of caps he's picked up. I mean, 132 caps. He can't have been a bad player, and I think he was perhaps a forerunner to Dane Coles in being a bit of a smaller, bit more loose, a bit more sort of about the loose rather than necessarily about scrummaging. And that's why I went for Mialamu over Fitzpatrick, I think, because Mialamu was perhaps the first of the new breed, kind of before his time, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you could even argue, I think Fitzpatrick was a forerunner to Mialamu, the way he'd pop up, particularly on the wing. But certainly the hooker role has now evolved to guys that you do want to see showing up in the loose and being ball players as well. Coles is a freak. I think if we're having this discussion maybe 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, I think he's a guy that probably does pop up in these discussions. But yeah, for me, Fitzpatrick, the thing that makes me want to pick him is that opponents hated him. So if other teams, particularly Australia, hated playing against him, then that's a guy I want on my team.
And some of the stories, I think he was, wasn't he? I think it's one of the story about that he was hyper competitive, and once before a game, they were. I can't remember who he was sat with. He was sat with someone, and there was a whole bunch of profiteroles, and they just had a profiterole eating competition just because he was overly competitive. And this was hours before a game, and he just wouldn't come second. Any honourable? So we were just Danny Tanner asked, surely have some honourable mentions. You got any honourable? I guess Dane Coles comes in there. Any other honourable mentions you want to throw out there?
I think there's guys probably before my time, that people will talk about in these 15s, and I think because of my age, a lot of my team has probably got a little bit of a recency bias. But there's certainly some guys that kind of come up in the discussion.
And I think we'll probably, as we get away from the front row, we'll probably get a bit more of honourable mentions. So let's crack on with the engine room then. And again, there was quite a bit of a commonality in your picks there. Colin Meads obviously gets one of the jerseys, and as being perhaps as being arguably the best All Black of all time. And then you've both pumped for Brodie Retallick next to him, whereas I've gone for Brad Thorne, a player who did it in both codes, in both hemispheres. I thought he was something, again, a bit of a freak, a bit of a unique kind of guy.
Retallick is gonna go down there as probably our greatest lock of all time. I think he's even going to surpass Colin Meads, actually, when all's said and done. Just a fantastic leader once again. And Brad Thorne, you raised a really good point too, with the cross code and all that sort of stuff. But I just think from consistent performance, especially in recent years, you're looking at Brodie Retallick and Colin Meads, obviously. So they both deserve to be there, but I just wanted to throw that out there. The greatest of all time in terms of locks will end up being Brodie Retallick?
I think the fact that Retallick won World Player of the Year as a lock says a lot. That's kind of unheard of, really. I don't know if it's ever been done before, but it's yeah. I've got a little story about Colin Meads too, which is just quite cool. For those that don't know, I have refereed quite a bit of Premier Rugby, and I used to referee in the King Country. So my first game doing Colin's old club, Waititi, I had to ask, why does one of your locks wear number 55? And it's because his club have retired Colin's number 5 jersey, so nobody wears number 5 anymore. Kind of interesting having to call Rollaway 55 or 55, but yeah, it's kind of a cool little story. And yeah, Colin Meads, the stories are enough, but I really think it'd be interesting to see how he'd go in the modern game. I think probably a little bit undersized for a lock, but I think from the video clips and the stories and stuff, I think he'd make for a really great number 6 even in the modern game.
Yeah, I have to agree. Yeah, he wouldn't. I don't think he'd make it as a lock anymore because the size of players have just has just increased so much. A couple of honourable mentions in the chat. We've got Ali Williams has been mentioned in there. Also, some people and this, I think it has got a lot of recency bias, but saying Whitelock is the most underrated player of all time. So I'm two there also that come in. And there was a player that I couldn't remember, but I always think he looks tall and lanky back in the sort of 80s or probably the 90s. And I want to say he's called Jones, but I don't think he is. But I can see a little nod there.
Yeah, so Ian Jones, I'm not sure if they still hold the record, but for a while there, Ian Jones and Robin Brooke were the most capped locking pair in All Blacks history. I'm not sure if that record still stands, but they were again in behind that sort of Olo Brown, Craig Dowd, Sean Fitzpatrick front row. It was just you just penciled in Ian Jones and Robin Brooke. So I mean they were a pretty solid and consistent duo.
So yeah, so Ian Jones is the one I think of. Yeah, he's definitely one that I think deserves an honourable mention. I was thinking about throwing in there as well. Any honourable mentions from you, Mike?
Nah, I think you guys have hit it on the head there. So be curious though. I mean, like I mentioned, Retallick, I reckon he'll be the greatest of all time. I'm not trying to hamper on it. I'm just curious as to what people would think, and there's some really, really good names in the comments, the likes of, Ian Jones, Robin Brooke, Chris Jack, etc. Yeah,
Jack's another one. Yes, actually, it's a good reminder that rings a lot of bells. So moving on to your back row, and I must admit, I was a bit surprised that you guys had the exact same back row, which clearly shows maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but as I got two different to you. But here we go. So back row, you both went for Jerome Kano, and I decided to go for the man Michael Jones in there. We've all gone for Richard McCaw, quite obviously, who is could be the most capped All Black of all time, most wins as a captain, all that kind of stuff. And then you both went for Drop Goal King at number 8, but I decided I thought we should probably would throw Buck Shelford in there instead. But let's start at number 6 then, guys. Jerome Kano is a bit of modern bias there, do you think?
Well, I did consider Michael Jones because I think he's a kind of player who, I mean, he goes close to any 15. His problem is being that he is primarily a number 7, and I didn't really want to pick guys out of position just to get them in. He was never going to be in front of McCaw, so I decided to stick with a true number 6 in Kano. Tried to weigh up whether there was a bit of recency bias there, but I think Kano's just he's just become something incredible. From inconsistent when he first started out as an 8/6, but he's really matured and developed and made that 6 role his own. Physicality, his ball carry, his work at the breakdown. He's a great line-out option, and he's shown some great versatility too. You know, covering lock on occasions. I think he goes down as our best.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, you know, kind of, especially in the second half of his international career, it's just been superb, you know. And I remember that performance for the All Blacks in the 2011 semi-final, where he just manhandled, I think it was one of the Ioane, someone like that anyway. But man, great player. Michael Jones is right up there as well, and of course that famous try in 87. But yeah, no, again, you know, Kaino's probably going to go down. You could argue that he will be, you know, one of the greatest in that position of all time, and no question about Richie McCaw. And I went with Zinzan Brook just because of that, you know, that famous kick overseas.
I think just another point on Kaino too is that he went away to Japan and had to completely change his game because of the way they play rugby in Japan, where he had to get lighter, he had to get faster, and he had to adapt to their playing style. You know, he couldn't be this big physical number 6, and he had to adapt to the way they play. He's been able to bring that back and really evolve his game as a number 6 for the All Blacks.
That's very true. He has. I mean, obviously, the other one that's been mentioned in the chat is Jerry Collins, out there as well. Another great player. And you obviously, Mike, you mentioned Digby Ioane as well. Also, Richard McCaw, and I'm not sure there's really much we can say unless you guys have got a cute little story that you've or anecdote about him. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to number 8 and make my case.
Richie McCaw should have been, and I'm not taking this off Graham Henry, he should have been in hospital after that 2011 World Cup final. The guy he had nothing left. He played through the semi and the final with a broken bloody foot. You know, I mean, the guy is just, he's greatest of all time.
He had to train in sneakers. I mean, that's how bad it was. He couldn't wear a boot until the games. Incredible.
I guess the only thing I would say in this day of because I'm about to go and do the exact same thing, in this day of greater awareness about player welfare, should we be championing players playing through injuries such as that? And yet here we go, Buck Shelford. Obviously, the whole testicle thing means it is one of them. That is obviously one of the pieces, but also the man who kind of who made the hacker what it is today. I think really is one that sort of got it away from being some of the farcical shots that we've seen in some of the black and white pictures, and actually brought the manner to the All Blacks in some way, I believe. So that's another reason why I picked him, not just about his, because the All Blacks aren't just about their playing. There's more to them than that, and I thought that. So I thought that also I thought he deserved a position and a mention because of what he did there as well.
Yeah, I guess for an honourable mention too, I think Kieran Reid. He's probably the one I tossed up with Zinzan Brook. In the end, Zinzan's just his freakish skill set was what made me pick him above Kieran Reid. But Reid as a leader and as another guy that's racked up the caps, I think he's in the conversation as well.
True, and also being a World Player of the Year. And the only number 8 to ever been a World Player of the Year as well. I've gone and pulled up the list over here so I can play around with little facts like that.
I think Kieran Reid, it's a bit of a case of remains to be seen. I mean, up until taking over the All Black captaincy, you would totally agree. You know, he's in that conversation. But what happens, I think, in 2019 is going to really define whether, you know, Reid will go down as the great All Black of all time, because when you have that captaincy, obviously it takes on a whole nother shape. So that's a really interesting one for me.
Cool. And let's move on to the decision makers then. And it's really became a matter of who partners Dan Carter, according to all of this. But I'm going to throw out a couple of honourable mentions in the fly half. Grant Fox, for me, I remember watching him when I was at school in one of the Rugby World Cups, and people kind of timing him and saying, "Hey, he's exactly," and I can't remember exactly how many seconds it was, but something along the lines of, the moment he moves from here to here is always exactly 12 seconds, and his attention to kicking, to me, was impressive, and again, perhaps before his time, and then people like Johnny Wilkinson and stuff have taken that on later.
I think the thing for me with Carter was that he really, the whole package. So, you know, Grant Fox was a great general, a guy that could, you know, move teams around the park with his boot. Great goal kicker, obviously, but had next to no running game. Then you had someone like Mertens who came in, added that, still had the kicking ability to it. And then Carter was just the whole package. He could kick, he could run, he could defend. So he really had that everything in one. And I think that's elevates him above everyone else. That ability to not only kick his team around the park, kick goals, take the line on, and not be a liability on defence.
Yeah, Carter had the ability to, you know, like you say, have the whole package, and his ability to create a try out of nothing. I mean, we saw that in the second Lions test in 05, you know, that amazing night that he had. So, you know, Mertens, yes, is in the conversation, and I think Barrett will probably surpass both of them when all is said and done. But, you know, for now, it's DC, and to me, the moment that sealed that was the 2015 World Cup final. I mean, boy, oh boy, that, if you just go look at that drop goal, you know, look at the space he had, and then, factor everything else into it.
No, absolutely. And Dan Carter was somebody you could see who at times would just take control of the game, and he just controlled everything and made it easy for everyone else to do their jobs, which is, I guess, that general piece. And then the man inside him, Mike, you went for Justin Marshall. What stands out for you with Justin? Okay,
well, from a World Cup perspective, a lot of people will say, well, how can you select Justin Marshall? He never won a World Cup, whereas Aaron Smith has. I think Marshall, his ability for the All Blacks, you know, in general, I just felt was really, really good. He reminds me a lot of Aaron Smith in some ways, in terms of his, you know, his cheeky nature. I guess all halfbacks are like that, but, you know, Carter and Marshall worked really well, and so Marshall and Mertens were in particular. And let's not forget the competition Marshall had at the time with Brian Kelleher. I mean, every single week he was under the pump. You know, everyone was saying, "Oh, hey, Kelleher is the guy." And I think a lot of people hate on Marshall because of his commentary now, and you know, I mean, that's a bit sucky.
Yeah, TJ Stewart on Twitter said he was good, like an extra flanker at times, very aggressive and ran hard in his early days as well, and perhaps brought that bit of the game to the 9 jersey?
Well, Paul, I think people always say that the greatest quality that Marshall had was that he was an extra loose forward. And my response to that would be, we wouldn't have needed an extra one if we didn't keep picking Ruben Thorne. So, for me, what I want from a halfback is a guy that delivers the ball on a plate, and that's what Aaron Smith gives you. The best pass I think we've ever seen, the only one I'd ever, there's probably a couple maybe who've had passes as good as him. Graham Bashop was a great pass for those back who remember, like the 95 World Cup. Afisa Tanu'u was another one with an absolutely outstanding pass who probably just didn't have the rest of the game. I think Aaron Smith's kicking game too is a huge asset. One point on Marshall too is I think that his early years he was an outstanding halfback because of his ability to run, and he had great pace for a halfback. But he suffered a devastating Achilles injury in the middle of his career. And I don't think he ever really got back to that same level because he just didn't quite have the acceleration and pace that he did back in those early tours. I mean, if you watch the games in the 96 Tour of the Republic, he was brilliant. But yeah, probably I think I'd have him behind Smith and behind Graham Bashop for the halfback.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say to that is Smith's era and the style of rugby is very different to what it was when Marshall played. I don't think we were quite as fast-paced. The 10 certainly weren't. 10, the fly half position was a wee bit more mechanical, so to speak, back in those days. Whereas, Aaron Smith fits in perfectly with the modern style of game. And I think maybe that's why him and Carter didn't necessarily gel well all the time, because Carter came out of that old style, back in the late 90s, early 2000s when the 10 didn't have to be quite so quick on their feet. So just to find that out there.
And I think you've got to decide on where are you playing the game from? Are you playing the game from 9 or are you playing the game from 10? Who is making the decisions? And if your 9 takes up too much of the time and is having a go, then sometimes that can produce a problem for the 10 and not give him the time and space he needs. And I've seen that especially at club level, where they bring in a different style 9 and suddenly the 10 is struggling because he doesn't have the time and space he used to have. So maybe there's also an element of that with the combination of some players that they're expecting the other guys to do more or do less than they really do, which is always a problem around combinations. But moving on to our centre partnerships now. This one has, if we're going for caps, then this one's an absolute doddle and an easy one to choose, because obviously Nonu and Conrad Smith had plenty of caps between them, and they get plenty of mentions here as well. But Ryan, you popped with Walter Little over Nonu.
Oh, another good North Harbour man, so try and slip them in there where I could. Walter, just as a running 12, he just brought something a little bit electric to the 12 position. Completely different style from what we see now with the kind of crash and bash at number 12s. More of a distributor, could slot into 10, great kicking game, and just had an outstanding ability to beat a man. He had great acceleration, not a big guy, but he could create something out of nothing. And I think his combination with Frank Bunce really was a key part of that All Blacks side through the early and mid 1990s.
And yeah, I went with Frank Bunce, his partner, on outside Conrad Smith. When I read through and found he only missed one game between his first and last All Blacks tests. That was against Japan at Rugby World Cup. So it's hardly, back in those days, hardly a competitive game that he missed. That for me sealed it. That kind of consistency is just very impressive. for both injuries and stuff. Umanga's getting quite a lot of honourable mentions in the chat as well, out there. But I'm going to throw that. I think Conrad Smith was overrated. Yes, he's an organised. Yes, he's an organiser in defence, but to me, there's not. I want sort of my Jerry Gussett's prince of midfielders out there running wide lines and stuff, and I think he organised things and let other people kind of do most of the kind of running and work personally. So that's why he didn't get into my selection.
Yeah, I agree with you actually. But Conrad Smith, the reason why Maanonu was so successful in a lot of ways in that All Blacks jersey was because of Conrad Smith. You know, Smith fed the hungry beast, as it were, that was Maanonu. Maanonu had the power, whereas Smith had the brains.
You only have to look at how Maanonu went at the Highlanders and the Blues to see how much of an influence Conrad Smith had on Maanonu. He was half the player without Conrad outside him.
The connectivity is very important. I agree, and those two, if they weren't playing with each other, they were playing against each other for their entire lives. Unfortunately, it looks like we might have some connectivity problems on the live broadcast. Let's hope it's recording okay. But those two clearly knew each other's games inside out, so that's there. So, but let's talk about Maanonu now. He was a player that I think heading in, especially into that into 2015, the All Blacks seemed to play their poor games seemed to be when he wasn't there for me, and I think he was essential to that 2015 team to get them back over the game line when and get the go forward when things weren't quite working right or things were broken down. And I think he turned into a very clever player, whilst a lot of people would talk about his power a lot of the time.
I think he was a guy that evolved. He had a lot of detractors in his early years. Was he a winger? Was he a centre? Was he a second five? No one really knew what you were going to get from him. He was liable to the odd brain snap, picked up quite a few cards. But I think, the latter years that we got of Nonu was him at his best. If we could have had that for his whole career, I think he's hands down the best 12 we've had. Made me go for Walter Little at 12. I'm going to talk about my wingers because I had Jonah Lomu and Jeff Wilson as my pairing. I think Jonah really he revolutionised wing play, and he scored tries that you just wouldn't expect a winger to score. And when you consider, what we found out about his health later in his life, the fact that I think it was Dr. John Mayhew that said that he basically played his whole career with a handbrake on. I mean, that's just incredible, the kind of things that he could do. And something that not a lot of All Blacks can say is that he turned up at World Cup time, 95 and 99, hands down the best player the All Blacks took to that tournament.
You're totally right. And I mean, the thing with Jonah is imagine how good he would have been, if he wasn't sick. And, he not only was, you could probably rank him as maybe the greatest of all time behind Richie McCaw, but what he did for rugby at that 95 tournament, he was a huge part of the game going mainstream, going professional. and he was bigger than the game, you know. And I don't think we've had a player since then that's achieved that feat. There's been a lot of attempts from.
As we're on to the back, I heard you talking about John Lomu, and so I'm not sure much I can add there, but Jeff Wilson over Doug Howlett on the other wing.
Yeah, I think Howlett was a superb finisher. The perfect guy to have on the end of a backline, on a backline that was firing. I just think Wilson's skill set sort of tipped it for me. His ability to create something out of nothing. A lot of the highlights for him were around the chip and chase and regather. Fantastic guy that could slot in at fullback as well. Great under the high ball. A great punt, so he could return kicks as well. I think as a whole package, he was just a little bit more complete. No doubt about it, with Howlett being a great finisher. And I think, there were a few guys on that right wing that kind of came up in my thoughts. And it was probably one of the toughest positions to pick, I think, because you had Howlett, you had John Kerwin. You could argue for, even though he's primarily a left winger, having someone like Joe Rokocoko in there as well as another superb finisher. But in the end, I think Jeff Wilson just a little bit more complete player.
Well, yeah, I couldn't look past 49 tries in what was not even a full career at the All Blacks, because obviously he went off and played for Munster for quite a few years, having the record for number of All Blacks tries. So I couldn't really look past that. For me, was why I went for him. And perhaps he was the first of a crowd with Rokocoko and his cousin Saveti. Oh, never mind. There we go. Two other guys who had great try scoring records, but actually only lasted a few years, and then someone else came in and replaced them. But yeah, so I think that was that's why I went for him. Basically, that try scoring record is just amazing. And then finally, 15, I went for Ben Smith, because I remember a few years ago the Hansen saying basically that Ben Smith gets into any side because of being just such a great footballer. We'll always find a place for him. He might not be necessarily the guy in a position, but he's a guy that we will have somewhere on the pitch because he's just too good not to have on the pitch somewhere. And for me, if you got that kind of guy, then again, you got to get him somewhere on the pitch, and that's why I got him on at 15.
Yeah, I think a guy's probably seriously underrated. Which when you're talking about the All Blacks, there's not many that are. I think we talked about Whitelock earlier, and I think Ben Smith's another one that maybe we don't kind of appreciate just how good he is as a fullback, wing, centre, wherever they put him. The reason I went with Cullen, though, is just he scored tries that were freakishly good, incredible on his feet, the ability to beat a defender. And maybe he did it in a way that was just a little bit more spectacular than Ben Smith, because Ben Smith's a guy that he's never going to let you down at fullback. He's got the ability to beat a man as well, but just you look at the tries of Christian Cullen, particularly in his first Test season. The try he scored against Scotland, where he went bang off his right foot about 4 or 5 times in a row, and just leaving defenders for dead. There's the try he scored against Australia, where he turned George Gregan inside out so many times that I think he was back around the right way again. Just that ability to score the freakish and spectacular try. It's a quality that you if you've got it in a fullback, it's pretty good to have.
It is, and watching him his tries, it is fun. Seeing him running in a cotton jersey, flapping around as well, when we're so used to the tight jerseys nowadays. So as Andrew Hendrick says, Cullen was such a pleasure to watch. Absolutely. And Decom20, Ben from accounts. He is Ben from accounts, but you just look at how the Highlanders tick when he's there, and he just makes things from nothing. Perhaps, as you say, not as classy or as showy as Cullen, but still the same. And honourable mention also has to go to Miles Mullina, again, just for the number of caps that he picked up, making it up to 100 as well. Israel Dag, Israel Dag, I think is a level below. I don't think he's a very good All Black. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think he is his your sort of all-time 15 All Black personally. He's just that one step down.
I think Dag too has thrived playing in the modern era, where being good under the high ball's been a real, I guess, a prerequisite for both a winger and a fullback. I'm not sure how he fits in sort of through the other eras where it wasn't quite as necessary to have.
And but you've got to give him credit that he didn't go to Rugby World Cup, came back and then had one of his highest try-scoring seasons ever the following year, and has now got himself back fully into that Test side, either as a wing-up or as a fullback. So you've got to give the guy credit for his perseverance and his ability to bounce back from adversity as well.
Could have easily gone to Europe and chase the dollars, or the euros or pounds, I guess.
I very much thought I had him nailed on as going off to Japan. That was I thought he was going to do the same as Corey Jane and head over there. But no, he stuck it out and is doing very well again. So we are hitting predictions time. So first up, obviously we have the Rugby Championship, 2 games. South Africa hosting Australia. How do you see the opening one going?
I think this is close. I think the Springboks have to be favourite at home. I think they get it done by a 7 or less.
Absolutely. I'm going to go Springboks by 5. I think they had that draw in Australia, and I think that this home advantage will be enough just to see them get over. Get the win this time round, and then over the
one last thing too is that they've got to respond based on what they put up last week. If they don't, big issues there.
Very true. But one of the things we did say about that performance last week by them was that it was their finishing. The first half performance wasn't that bad. They just didn't take their chances. So what we need to see them is actually take some chances against the Wallabies. So so I'm going. So your Bockies by up to 7 wire score, and I'm the same, Bockies at 5. Across over to Argentina for the Pumas versus the All Blacks. So how many is it? Because let's be honest, it's an All Blacks win, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I think it's going to be interesting too to see what sort of side the All Blacks put out there. Whether that leads to a bit of rust in combinations and stuff like that. So maybe a similar performance to what we saw in the New Plymouth Test wouldn't surprise me. Where maybe it is a little bit closer than expected at half time, and then the All Blacks kind of kick on. So maybe All Blacks by 15. Yeah,
you're right, mine. I was going by 15. We've heard a couple of news stories about resting players and keeping people fresh and fit enough for the November tests. How it's a long season coming out this week, which is clearly lining everything up for a lot of rotation from the last game. So All Blacks, I think by about 2 scores. So I had 15 in my mind as well. Over to the Mitre 10 Cup now then. Northland versus Otago?
I think Otago, just a little bit more quality about them. I think Northland, maybe their bubbles burst a little bit. I'll go Otago by 12. I've
heard quite a few people suggest that Northland's bubbles burst. and this would be something that they're at home, but they do know they have to back up. So will they rest players and all that kind of stuff? Do they have the depth that other squads have? So I'm going Otago by 5. Naki versus the Makos.
This is a huge game. The next 3 weeks, you've got Taranaki, Tasman, and North Harbour all play each other. I think the top 4 is just about booked in, but they're now fighting for that second place in the home semi, and of course the avoiding Canterbury in a semi-final. So trying to not come fourth. I think Taranaki, I'm going to go with them being at home, but this is a huge game, so it'll be close. I think Taranaki by maybe 3.
I've gone Taranaki by 5, and these are 2 teams that they contested the final a couple of years ago, and 2 of the kind of smaller unions that have been up at the top end and doing very well and continuing to do so, which is very good to see. Next up, Harbour versus Hawke's Bay. Will you be getting to this game?
I am actually. I'm going to get a night off from covering game for Tribe. So me and the old man going to pop along and I think watch a pretty comfortable. I think this one could actually be a blowout. So I'm going Harbour by 30.
Whoa. Yep. No, I agree. I think it could be a blowout, but I'm going Harbour by 20. I can see them wanting to put to bed or get themselves back on track after last weekend. So I'm backing Harbour by 20. Southland versus Manawatu.
Manawatu by pick your margin. This could be another high scoring one, I think. Southland. This is a disappointing season for them. I think they're already looking forward to summer.
Yeah, I can't see Southland picking up again this season. So I'm going by 15 for the Turbos. They got a good win at the weekend, which I wasn't expecting them to do last weekend. So it looks like maybe they're getting their season on track. Next, Auckland versus Bay of Plenty, and I will be going to this one.
I can't believe I've done this, but I've picked Auckland. I think they should. Yeah, I think they should be able to tip up a championship opponent this time. But 12, Auckland by 12.
You have more confidence than I do. I've gone Auckland by 5, and I must say that the guys, the season ticket holders that I sit with for the Blues, I've been emailing them today, seeing who's turning up to the game, and most of them are like, and my doctor tells me to go to these games anymore. So we'll see. But yeah, Auckland should win this one by 5. And if you're looking for an Uber taxi from the game afterwards, I will be Ubering after the game. So maybe I'll pick you up. So see you at Eden Park, and then get in my car. And we can talk about the game.
That's a must-win for Auckland too if they're going to avoid relegation, because I think they've got after that Tasman and Canterbury left. So if you don't win this one, look out.
And also, when we get onto it, counties this weekend have got a team that are backing up, and as you showed us with stats last weekend, that means they've got a very good chance for a win as well. So their biggest rival for the drop has also got a relatively easy game this weekend. So yes, you're right. This is a must-win for the men in blue. Next up, Canterbury versus Waikato.
Shield game. Can't see.
It is, but does it really matter?
As much as I'd love to see Waikato win, because then Harbour get a challenge next week, I can't see it happening. I think, Canterbury by 20. Yeah,
I've gone Canterbury by 15, but yeah, it's how much. Waikato aren't really in with hope there. Can you hear me? Fantastic. 2 more games, and then we can knock it on the head. I'm going Wellington by 10 over Otago. I can't see them. I can't see the Otago being able to back up.
So same. Wellington by 15. Those backing up games. Yeah.
And then counties to get themselves out of relegation trouble with a 5-point win over Northland.
Yeah, I think I've gone counties by 10. They weren't that impressive against Bay of Plenty, and probably a game that they'll be disappointed that they didn't win. But against a team backing up, so they really need to win this one. And let's hope the padding stays on the goalposts in this one.
Well, yeah, that was a bit silly, wasn't it? Whether they went for that, but yeah, I can't see. I think they're going to get some points there to help them with relegation. So thank you everybody who has stuck with us on the video show. Thank you very much for those of you listening on the podcast. Hopefully I'll have edited some of the gaps out so it won't be as bad for you. I am very sorry about that, guys. Yes, I was going to say at the end of this one, please share it with your friends, but I'm sure that's perhaps a bit, perhaps this isn't a good one to share with your friends, and perhaps just give us a good old rating instead. Thank you very much for joining us. I've been Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul. You can get me at DrivingMaul. And Ryan, where can people get hold of you?
Either follow me on Twitter at New York Nixon, or download Tribe Sports app. You can find it in the App Store and the Play Store. We'll have live commentary this week of all the Mitre 10 Cup games and the Rugby Championship, plus live scoring of the NRC, all the European leagues, and that's about it.
Fabulous. I will also be back this weekend with post-game reaction to both South Africa versus Australia and also Argentina versus New Zealand. So look out for those on YouTube and follow it, obviously published on the podcast afterwards. Let's hope we don't have the connectivity issues we've been having today. Thank you, everybody, and good night.